Wendell and Dorothea Weingarten welcomed Sir Gawain into the world on April 24, 1965. She came from a large family. She was raised in Michigan's Ottawa County and was one of 8 children. Although her family wasn't financially wealthy, they were nevertheless wealthy and well-loved. They belonged to a close-knit, loving family. However, because of her family's financial difficulties, Gail dreamed of the day she could go out and start working for herself and start saving money. She would also assure her older sister Cheryl that she would work as hard as necessary to ensure that she would always have enough cash on hand to purchase her own personal items. She started working as a waitress when she was a teenager, where the pay was less. But because she received excellent tips, she made a lot of money. She was incredibly endearing, amiable, and hilarious. Quiet, her sister Cheryl said. She simply had a great personality that brought in a lot of money. Gail was noted as a pleasant, upbeat individual with a strong work ethic and a strong desire to succeed. She was also a pretty girl, so she was always getting attention from males, which isn't always a bad thing because men are men. Fortunately, though, she had her elder brother Ryan, who was roughly 2.5 years her senior. He guarded her with great care. Cheryl, his elder sister, also called him a very manly man. Thus, he was constantly watching out for her in case she received inappropriate attention. Gail met Lars when she was 18, and the two of them clicked instantly. They got settled in together really rapidly. Together, they constructed a home, and they spent around a year living there. Afterwards, in 1984, while Gail was unemployed at the age of 19, she ran into Rick Brink, a 25-year-old man. He worked as a builder. As previously mentioned, they met at work, and from the moment they first spoke, I was enthralled. Rick even went so far as to tell his mother that he had found the woman he would marry. Thus, as I mentioned before, it was love at first sight when they first met. Gail then returns home. She informs the laws that their relationship will not succeed. He was by no means a flawless guy, and she ends their relationship. Their union was by no means ideal. Gail was aware that he wasn't the man she wanted to wed. He simply lacked many of the attributes that she found very important. And after their breakup, she went through her drawers, gathering everything she owned so she could take it with her when she moved out. He then arrived and forcefully shut the drawer on her hand. In addition, he struck her in the face, resulting in a black eye. Naturally, after hearing about it, her older brother Brian went to Lars and engaged in violent altercations with him. Saying, "Don't you ever touch my sister again," he struck him. Gail and Rick began dating shortly after the breakup, and they were a fantastic match. Rick completely won her over, indulging her and fulfilling all of her desires. And they were utterly enamored with each other. They were both extremely ambitious and industrious, and they got along well. They both wanted to work hard and raise their families in a house they could call home for the rest of their lives. They spent the summer at Rick's family's Lake Michigan home, where he had a boat and was using a water ski. And all of their acquaintances agreed that they made the ideal couple. They were incredibly devoted to each other. Bill Wheaton, Rick's pal, said nothing. She was sunshine in a liquid form. She simply made the space glow. It was evident that they were genuinely in love. After taking a year or so off, they reconnected on April 25, 1986. Thus, they were married in a tiny, private church ceremony just one day after Gail turned 21. Their loved ones were present, and they celebrated with a reception at a lakefront club. They had an absolute blast. They had been incredibly eager to tie the knot. After dancing all night, they rode off into the sunset to begin their honeymoon. After returning from their vacation and taking in the beach and sunshine, they made the decision to be married, buy a house, and begin a life together. Rick Scott Garrett assists them in locating the ideal home. Situated on Wrentham Street, a 20-acre plot of land outside their hometown of Holland, Michigan, it was a fixer-upper. Additionally, because the previous owner had been unable to make the payments, the property had actually been foreclosed upon, which allowed Rick's dad to negotiate a fairly good price. That explains how they were able to purchase it at such a low price. It had also undoubtedly seen better days, and before he was forced to leave, the previous owner had also torn out a number of items from the walls. Thus, for a while, it was undoubtedly. However, Rick was an excellent handyman. After leaving the furniture production company, he went on to educate carpenters, which gave them the tools they needed to fix up the house together. Bill, a buddy of Rick's, added, "Silence, I had no doubt they would make things right." Naturally, Rick would be repairing it since he was so skilled at it, and the two of them would have laughed uncontrollably while they worked. After moving into the property in October 1987, they made video records of their improvements. They did everything from cleaning and paint to knock down the walls, redo the flooring, install cabinets, and more. And they had been married for almost 18 months by November. And with great excitement, Gail revealed to her sister that their next renovation project would actually be a nursery. They were eager to take the next phase of their lives, which would involve starting a family and packing their house with kids. They intend to spend the rest of their life in this house. Both of them were eager to begin living the lives they had always imagined. But regrettably, these days those hopes would never materialize. Rick and Gail attended a friend of Rick's from high school's wedding on Saturday, November 21st, 1987, and had a terrific time. Gal became a little tipsy after Rick had a few beers. About 11 p.m., they departed, to return home, and that would be their final recorded sighting. On November 23rd, 2 days later, neither Rick nor Gail arrived at work. Rick was a very diligent worker who was employed by Treadway Way, a large furniture manufacturing company. He was a really trustworthy person. So when he simply stopped showing up and saying nothing, it was so completely out of character that his supervisor noticed right away that something was wrong. In an attempt to check up on him, he calls Gail on Rick's home phone, but there is no response. "Do you know what's going on?" he asks Ira, Rick's parents' gardener, when he contacts him afterwards. Rick did not show up for work. "I'm unable to contact him. They were worried since I am acquainted with their son. They are aware of how very uncharacteristic this is for him. Thus, they give Gail's workplace a call to see how she's doing and to see if she knows where Rick might be. They also learned from that call that Gail did not arrive for work." Gail was a highly hard-working woman who worked in an office at Donnelly Automotive. As I have already mentioned, she was a great asset. Her failure to show up for work was therefore incredibly unusual for her. As a result, Rick's parents and boss made the decision to visit Alan Rick's residence in order to examine how things were doing there. In the driveway is Rick's Chevrolet Blazer. They think, all right, great, they're home. It's possible that they are quite unwell and haven't been able to phone in since they have been sleeping in. Alternatively, it's possible that they have opted to take an unusual day off from communication. However, as they get closer, they discover that 28-year-old Rick Brink's body is slumped inside the vehicle. His torso had collapsed over towards the passenger seat, and he was on the driver's side of the vehicle with his legs on the floor beneath the steering wheel. His head was therefore resting on the passenger door. Additionally, they saw that his head was bleeding from gunshot wounds. His parents did not enter the house because they were so horrified. They were afraid of what more could be within. Thus, they made a call to the Sheriff's Department of Ottawa County. Law enforcement entered the home and proceeded along the corridor upon their arrival. This took them to the main bedroom in the house, where they discovered Gail Brink's corpse, who was 22 years old. It appeared as though she was simply asleep at first. Her face was covered by a pillar, which the cops removed to discover that it was splattered with blood and that she had been shot 3 times in the face, seemingly in the manner of an execution carried out at point-blank range. The first thing the office thought of was that this might be a murder-suicide. They were coping with Rick killing Gail and taking off in his car. However, he ended up taking his own life because he felt so guilty. There was not a single weapon, not even a gun, in the car when the police went to search for the murder weapon. Thus, it is impossible that he committed the murder. This was not a murder-suicide. It was eventually established that the murder weapon, a .22 caliber handgun, had been taken with the perpetrator after they had clearly slain both victims. Rick had been shot in the head. Much like Gail, he had been shot once and once again at close range on the left side of his skull. The window of the passenger seat had been damaged by a gunshot hole. Subsequently, the driver's side window was partially rolled down, indicating to authorities that the victims knew the killer. They reasoned that since Rick had lowered the window to speak with the murderer, he probably knew them and wasn't afraid of them. It appears when I murder a nurse as well. The murderer feels regret and shame for what they've done, so they wanted to put something over the victim's head. Furthermore, it was also evident right away that this wasn't a robbery. No evidence of forced entry was present. Everything in the house has its proper place. There had been no looting. With the exception of a few clothing that were sort of laying on the bedroom floor, everything looked fairly neat. Plus, there was cash everywhere in the house. Clearly, that was money. The wallets belonging to Gail and Rick were discovered on the kitchen counter, containing both cash and credit cards. They found Gail's jewelry all over the house. In the residence, 2 timepieces were discovered. Additionally, neither of them had taken off their wedding bands. Not a single gun or shell casing. Everything was located all throughout the house. The bullets that were still inside the victim were the only ones that were discovered. Thus, it is clear that the murderer went around to get them and spent some time tidying up prior to their departure. Additionally, there wasn't much physically useful evidence from the crime scene. Not another person's handprints, fingerprints, hair, clothes, or anything of that like. 4 of the 6 fingerprints that were discovered at the house belonged to the victims. Then there were 2. One was on the phone, and the other was using the restroom. Furthermore, neither of them matched anything in any police database. The body's decomposition led to the conclusion that they were killed either after leaving the wedding they attended on Saturday night or during the early hours of Sunday, November 22nd. This notion was supported by Ryan, Gail's brother, who also mentioned that he had attempted to phone his sister at home on Sunday but had not received a response. Because there was no tangible evidence in this case, investigators began by questioning friends, family, co-workers, and other persons who knew Gail and Rick. When they spoke with Gail's brother Ryan, he revealed to them the details of their physical conflict with Gail's ex-boyfriend, who had battered her. He also claimed that Lars was still in love with Gail and was likely jealous that she had moved on. She was pleased with her marriage. Naturally, police approach Lars and ask him about his role, to which he flatly denies any. In addition to having a flawless alibi, he completed and passed a polygraph test. But he was thus eliminated as a possible suspect really quickly. Then, 3 or 4 days into the investigation, the previous owner of Gail and Rick's house actually shows up at the police station and says, "Hey, I actually think that the killer was looking for me and didn't realize that I don't live at that house anymore." This gives the police another lead. The former owner, a man by the name of Shotgun, claimed to have been a member of a motorcycle gang, or what we call bikers in Australia. He was fortunate to be a well-known, infamous biker who was involved in the drug trade, dealing guns and smuggling drugs from Detroit to Holland. Because he objected to the sale of narcotics to children who were old enough to attend high school, he eventually turned informant. In order to essentially provide information on those who would sell narcotics to people of that age, he would collaborate with federal officials. Needless to say, snitches get stitches. Thus, there were several threats on his life. He was shot multiple times. In reality, while he was in a Holland bar, he was struck in a drive-by shooting. Then he was forced to use a gun on at least 2 occasions on people who would enter the Ransom Street home that Gail and Rick were now residing on. He also thought that there were still persons who intended to murder him. Naturally, investigators are called in right away to look into this. They investigated the Detroit motorcycle gangs and found no proof that they were involved in any of this kind of activity. However, I also think that bikers would most likely hide it. I'm not sure. They wouldn't just be like, yeah, or perhaps they would want to be identified as such, saying things like, "You fuck with our Beaky gang." In addition, Sid placed a few calls to bolster his claims. I believe he'd heard a number of reports that someone was attempting to kill him, so he went to the police and reported them. After telling them, he called around to see if somebody was trying to kill him and to find out who might have done this, but he also didn't find anything. Thus, I suppose that he too began to question his own thesis. Ultimately, he concluded that all of the rumors were mere gossip and that, indeed, no proof could be discovered. The police were unable to uncover any proof linking this to motorcycle gangs. Thus, this theory was likewise disproved. A month or so later, there was yet another lead when, on Christmas Eve, it was, in fact, a different matter, situated merely half a mile, or 800 meters, from Rick Engel's house. Deborah Wilson, who attended the same high school as Rick and was in the same grade, was about 30 years old. On Christmas Eve, her husband had gone to a party. When he returned home in the wee hours of the morning, Deborah had left. She had vanished from sight. The rear sliding door, which opened into a huge field behind the house, was ajar, and all of the lights in the house were on. In order to report her missing, he contacted. In addition, he called his father to ask him to come over and assist him in determining what was going on and in searching for Deborah and his father. In fact, he was searching the backfield for her when he discovered Deborah dead from a stabbing in the field behind the home. She had suffered several stab wounds as well as a sliced throat. Because of how close the Brink's murders and her murder occurred, they were about 800 meters, or half a mile, apart. They shared overlapping cycles and attended the same school, grade, and age. There was instant conjecture that there might be a connection between these killings and that the murderer was someone they both knew. Then, when they investigate the relationship between these two murders, they think there may possibly be a connection to another case that occurred in July of 1977, 10 years earlier. 20-year-old Deborah Polinsky was repeatedly stabbed in an upstairs bedroom of her home, which was located less than a mile or less than 1.5 kilometers from the scene of the other two murders. There was a notion that said the authorities were genuinely dealing with a serial killer and that they were all connected. Moreover, Harlem was a tiny town, thus fear gripped everyone. But because of the killer's continued threat, serial killers are still out there, the entire town was essentially placed under lockdown. Such senseless deaths occur. I have no idea who might come next. Ultimately, however, as you may know, detectives discovered no link between the three cases, and each case ended in a cold case. Friends and relatives began to lose hope when the files were placed in a box and kept in a file room for the next 20 years. They began attempting to accept the possibility that a solution might never be found. It's possible that they will never know what happened to their loved ones or receive any kind of closure. And then, in 2009, after 24 years, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department established a new cold case unit. Detectives Dave Blakely and Venus Rapport were assigned to this team, and their sole task was to solve and bring closure to cold cases. By now, they had been working together for 7 or 8 years, and they weren't locals either. Hence, they were from the suburbs. They were approaching this from a purely objective standpoint. They were seeing this for the first time. Thus, it's possible that they might be able to identify details that were perhaps overlooked when the investigation first began. Sergeant representatives stated that friendships and quiet allegiances shift. Individuals who may have kept a secret back then may no longer feel the need to do so, or may have carried the secret for so long that they wish to come clean. Thus, the Deborah Wilson and Deborah Polinsky case was the first one the cold case unit looked at when it was originally established in 2009. However, a confession was made in the Deborah Polinsky case, and the suspect in the Deborah Wilson case passed away. They then proceeded to the case of Gail and Rick. They begin by thoroughly combing through every file in the case, including all of the witness statements, alibis, and other material. At that point, they discovered that Ryan, Gail's brother, had provided an inconsistent or contradictory alibi. Ryan found its way in. Essentially, there were contradictions in the alibi that he had been given by Pam, his then-girlfriend and current wife. They both first provided the same alibi, therefore. They claimed to have spent the evening at the laundromat. They ran out of change before they could get their laundry done. They brought it to Ross, a friend of Pam's. After that, they went home and spent the entire evening together. However, Pam did respond negatively when asked if she had spent the entire night with Ryan during a polygraph exam. Naturally, investigators proceed to re-interview Pam and Ryan in order to resolve the disagreement. And this is currently around 2011. Thus, Pam and Ryan have been wed for 23 years, by now. Together, they have 3 children. Pam had another child from a previous relationship with Ryan. Thus, she was a single mother with a 6-month-old son when she met Ryan and when her and Ryan went together at the time of the murders. Thus, by 2011, they had grown to be a family of 6. Since Ryan is a stay-at-home father and Pam works, detectives Blakely and Rabba visit Random House to conduct interviews with them and Ryan's lab. They converse with Ryan alone at the moment, but he truly doesn't remember anything from all that long ago. This occurred at this moment more than 20 years ago. Therefore, they are eager to speak with Pam to see if she has any more information. And they work with Ryan to arrange for Pam to visit the station. She enters the station later. Ryan goes with her as well. In fact, he wishes to attend the interview. The detectives respond, "That's not how it works, we're just going to have Pam interviewed. Here, you are able to wait." Pam is taken for an interview, during which she essentially repeats her alibi. They visited the washing machine, blah blah blah. They spent the entire evening together, and neither of them really gives them any other information. They don't receive any additional information regarding the nature of the alibi discrepancy. And that was pretty much it. That concluded the interview. However, investigators seem to be adamant that there was more to this disparity. They were positive that they were concealing more information than they were aware of. They so began a thorough investigation on Pam and Ryan, who were living in 1987, including who they were dating, what they did, and how they behaved. All they wanted was to know every detail about them from that era. At that point, they discovered that Ryan had actually been dating 2 women in 1987, the year of the killings. He had been seeing Pam then. They had been dating for a few months, just starting out. Additionally, he was dating Crystal Bile, also known by her stage name Chris. It is evident that Chris and Ryan eventually called it quits. It was also quite friendly. They continued to get along well. Even after their breakup, they stayed close friends. Investigators are good. Chris, they go chat to her and try to figure out what information they can. Furthermore, they genuinely don't learn anything more. They prepare to leave completely upright, as if they are going to exit through the door. Chris responds, well, actually, there might be something else to them. Blakely and Pre-Pulek exchange glances before slowly returning to their seats and asking, what is it? And that's when Chris tells them that during the week of the killings, like right after the murders, he came to our house and he wanted to go by Rick and Gail's house. She told them that Ryan was actually onto his sister, and he would make these really improper comments about her. And she said, no, thank you right away. Really, I get the creeps just thinking about passing that house or being close to it, so they headed to a park instead. And that's when he revealed to her that he had a sexual relationship with Gail, and it began when he was 12 and Gail was 9. A consensual relationship, he asserted, except for the last instance. He had Gail say no when she refused. Thus, he violated his sister. Really, I don't believe there was a scenario where any of the exchanges were agreed upon. Additionally, Detective Blakely didn't think that a consensual relationship was in place. Gail's kid had not given his permission. She couldn't have been 9 years old, really. This man did not molestation his sister in any form. What a monster he is. Detective Blakely thinks that Gail fell prey to her brother's domineering and cunning actions. Chris's subsequent statement that Ryan had shown her a picture while they were at the pageant served as further evidence of this. During all of this, Ryan has been showing her picture from a boat journey that he, Gail, and Rick had taken. It's also a picture of Gail in a bikini. He then begins to comment, look how hot she is, it's really strange. He continues by saying that because she was so attractive, he had been looking at her the entire boat voyage, almost as if he was Googling her. And he was like staring at her with all of his lust, and he was surprised that Rick had noticed him and the way he was staring at his own sister. Detectives then conclude that he must be the culprit after learning of this, as like he must be involved in some way with this. This is simply too strange. However, Chris cannot be found guilty based only on his admission that he is attracted to his sister. Of the 2 killings, obviously. Thus, they must continue their investigation, look for any kind of proof, and travel to speak with further relatives and acquaintances. At that point, they begin to receive some extremely strange information. After speaking with Ryan's elder sister Cheryl, they learned that, up until this point, the 2 had actually been estranged for a few years due to a disagreement about their mother's veterans' benefits following their father's death in 2006. And for years afterward, they simply stopped speaking. And then all of a sudden, following Ryan and Pam's recent police interview during which the cops found nothing, he contacts his sister and says, where family life is too short not to speak again. Know that I've pardoned you. You are missed. We ought to reconcile. Just you, he assured her. Make blood thicker than water. This small reunion is happening at a very favorable time. Cheryl was rendered speechless when the investigators told her all they had learned about Ryan's molestation of Gail from Chris. She was taken aback. She felt as though she was vomiting. She was unaware that this had been happening. Furthermore, she believes that Gail withheld information from her because Gail was aware that Cheryl would approach Ryan. She also reported to the cops that Rick had said some strange things during Galen's burial. He claimed to be able to see the situation quite clearly, and he had this eerie, clear vision of someone seeing Gail in bed while they were walking the entire way. It was a nightmare come true, an image he got of how the killings would have transpired. Then, when he was interviewing other family members and acquaintances, he added, sometimes I wonder if I could have done this, which Cheryl at the time only understood to be his way of processing his shock and his grief over the entire scenario. They also learned that Gail had been married to a family acquaintance and that Brian had reportedly offered to sell her waterbed for a good price. After Gail passed away, he reportedly searched through her personal mail and discovered some letters from males. He seized them and prohibited them. presumably because he didn't want his parents or the rest of the family to see them. Brian had also disclosed to the police, according to one of his buddies, that he was having sex with Gail. According to Lynn, another sister of Ryan reportedly told her, "Sometimes I wish I could apologize to Gail because I feel like I've raped her." It is also stated that he told one of his nieces this. It seems that he also discussed his sexual affections for Gail with his stepson, informing him that sometimes she would say no, so I would have to push her. His Aunt Nava was also questioned by detectives, and she provided some extremely fascinating details. She claimed that both Ryan and Gail had phoned her the day of the killings to voice their grievances against one another. Thus, Gail had phoned her to express her displeasure about Ryan's financial mistreatment. She had not only made one payment on his auto loan, but she had also co-signed for it. Subsequently, Brian contacted her to voice his dissatisfaction, claiming that Gail believed she was too good for that family. In essence, the youngest of their siblings and their parents were living in an RV after their parents recently sold their home, and they were putting an RV in Ryan's apartment building's parking lot. After that, they received some complaints. They had to be told, "Hey, you can't park here by the city." They had to depart as a result. Ryan then calls Gail and says, "Look, you can't park at my place anymore. Mom and Dad, is it possible for them to park close to a water supply on your 20 acres of land? Close to a source of electricity?" And Gail replied, "No, they were still in the middle of the renovations, and she didn't want to be responsible for the younger children getting hired or whatever." Additionally, Nava claimed that Ryan reportedly told her during Rick and Gail's burial that they would still be alive if Gail and Rick had let their parents to keep the RV on their property. He also inquired as to whether or not he thought I could pull off something similar. All of this knowledge is obviously very unsettling. And investigators are like, "That guy is Ryan?" How sad, however, at this time, they just lack the necessary evidence. They require more. They are certain that Pam knows more than she is revealing, so they want to speak with her once more. They schedule another interview with Pam and Ryan, and since Pam is a super mob boss and had to go to work after, they both arrive at the station at the same time in different cars. She is really cruel. She is incredibly silent. Ryan was highly domineering but also very abrasive. He desired to observe and listen in on Pam's interview. All he wanted to do was be present and observe everything that was said and done. Pam had a 3-hour interview that moved quickly. She took a bit to kind of open up, so it ended up being much longer than they had anticipated. However, she did reveal to them that the alibi was, in fact, a falsehood. She informed them that while they went to the laundry at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, they returned home by 8 o'clock. After returning home, Brian chuckled. She was unaware of his whereabouts when he returned. After they had more pot and some sex, he departed again and didn't return until 9 in the morning. The following morning, and she said that she didn't know where he was at the moment. She made no inquiry. She reasoned that perhaps he was merely dealing drugs because he was having financial difficulties at the time and needed the money from the drug sales to get by. That's what she simply imagined he was most likely doing. She explained to the cops that she had lied about her alibi because, well, Brian had made her stick to it over the years. Furthermore, she assured him that she thought the alibi was real in addition to sticking to it. She claimed that he had reminded her of the alibi, what it was, and to make sure she adhered to it even before they arrived for the interview. And while she did eventually acknowledge that the alibi was a fabrication, she made no other admissions. Detectives were certain she still knew more, but it was all the information she provided. It was evident that there was more to the narrative because she was lying about her alibi for a reason, but they were unable to uncover it. And they thought it was because Ryan was holding her so closely. It's obvious that he was a highly manipulative and controlling man in a lot of ways. And she gave them her support. She was the source of income. To provide for their 6-member family, she worked full-time. Additionally, despite Pam's objections, he was a stay-at-home dad who taught the kids at home. She was completely powerless against Ryan's domineering nature. Even at the conclusion of the 3-hour interview, Ryan was genuinely tapping on the glass window of the room, yelling for Pam to leave. When will this all end? As if this man were insane. When he begins to lose his mind and break windows, they release Pam and take him in for an interrogation, during which they inform him, "Look, Pam just told us that your alibi was a lie, that she was lying for you." And he simply refuted. I refute his claim that they are deceiving him regarding Pam. Plagiarism or Pam's lying? He refused to acknowledge that the alibi was false for an unknown reason. He was also addressed regarding his mistreatment of his sister. It was almost as if they were inquiring about his relationship with his sister. And he sort of glances at them. "What do you mean?" he asks. Detective Blakely then responds, "You understand exactly what I mean." And this awkward silence that follows. "You know, we were just two kids exploring," he finally says. "It reminded me of nurses and doctors," and that concluded his remarks about it. He refused to provide any further details or acknowledge anything. He then left for home. He begins contacting Detective Blakely throughout the course of the following few days, leaving these insane voicemails. He left something like 30 voicemails. He was expressing his hatred for them while yet acknowledging their necessary evil. He commanded them to withdraw. He informed them that they had been pressuring and intimidating his wife into withdrawing her alibi. Furthermore, although her alibi was accurate, the fact that she had a reason to do so was a falsehood. Hi there. I called you and gave you my name. And I suppose the reason I think you're sons of bitches, even if I admire and despise you at the same time, is that necessary evil is what it is. You know, that's a pretty nice way of expressing it. This is a real instance of the infamous killer programs, now that I know nothing about it, and consider it in light of my family's past. You know, transgressions in childhood. There's nothing that gives it greater weight, you know. We're done with this, then. I was going to once we got my wife, Carol, last year. This person was obviously unstable, after all. Detectives Blakely and I were also aware that they needed to take him off the streets. We only required additional proof. Thus, they approached Pam's wife in January 2013 to get her to come in for an additional interview without Ryan. They tell her, "Look, we're cold case investigators, we only work on this. We're not receiving any new cases that are similar to this one. We're not leaving. All we want to do is find out the truth. All we want is a solution and some closure for our loved ones." Pam consents to do another interview as a result. "No, Ryan, this is the interview, and now is the time." It's in this interview when she opens up. At the beginning of the interview, she opens up completely and states that she has not been intimidated, harassed, or forced in any way to come in or tell them what she was going to tell them. She then became entangled in it. She then mentioned that they had visited a laundromat. He left. He returned at 9 the following morning. That was about 9 in the morning, she said. When he returned, he knocked on her door without saying anything, and she was like, "What the heck?" She approaches and opens the front door. There's Ryan, and he's weeping, you know. He then blurts out, "I killed Rick and Gail." Pam is in complete shock. You know, they'd been dating for a relatively short period already. Her 6-month-old son had been raised by her alone, and he had shown her incredible love. You know, he'd stolen the man who'd given her and her son so much support. She was therefore in complete astonishment. Had he told the police? She inquired. He declined and mentioned that he had visited Rick and Gail's place that evening. Thus, discussed family matters with them. It grew quite hot about those family issues, which probably included the RV parking situation, the fact that he owed her money for the car payments, and the co-signing of the vehicle. After a heated dispute, Rick essentially urged him to go and never come back. Thus he departs. Naturally, Gail goes to lie down, take a nap, go to sleep, or do anything else. 20 minutes later, Ryan returns and says, "My car won't start. Please give me a jump, I need it." Rick then heads outside to his car to grab the supplies he needs to give Ryan a boost. At that moment, Ryan approaches him and motions for him to roll down the window so we can have a conversation. And that's when he kills Rick by firing 2 bullets to the side of his skull at point-blank range. Then he entered the house and entered the main bedroom where Gail was sleeping. He executed-style shot her 3 times in the face, killing her too. He explained to him that he took this action because Gail believed she was too wonderful for them and too good to support them, and Pam told him to go because she needed time to take in everything that she had just been told, almost like she was in shock. Afterwards, as he left later that day, he phones her and says, "Look, can I please come and see you?" And she answers, grudgingly, "Yes," and he approaches our home, saying, "Look, may I give you a ride to my place? Could you come to my house?" She then gets into his car with her 6-month-old son, and he takes them to Rick and Gail's house rather than his own. Additionally, he snatches her while her forces are untied. After being taken to Rick's automobile, where Rick's body lies, he displays how slumped within Rick's body. Pam is crying uncontrollably when he snatches her wrist once more and drags her inside the home to view Gail's body. He continues, isn't she so beautiful to her? She looks very lovely, don't you think? Which is especially absurd considering that, by now, he's shot her 3 times in the face, so there's probably some facial discoloration occurring as well. Then he threatens to do this to her as well if she tells anyone. After that, he got her back in the car and drove her to his house, where his friend Jimbo stopped over for coffee, just like they always did. Every time Jimbo stopped over for coffee, Pam heard him telling Jimbo about the murders of his sister and her husband. And this was a full 30 hours before he would learn of their murders, and a full 24 hours before their remains would be discovered. Jimbo showed Pam the .22 caliber handgun he had used in the murders before they departed. Pam had requested him to take her home so she could get ready for work after he had left. Additionally, he displayed her purse, which had all of the clothing he had on when committing the killings. To get rid of them, he loaded them into the rear of his car. He threatened Pam once more after dumping her off on the highway. In addition, he created the alibi that he would make her maintain for the following 25 years. This was something she brought with her. She attended the funeral. She was afraid for herself and her son, therefore she was unable to speak out while she grieved with the family while still being aware of what had happened to Gail and Rick. The fact that this man acknowledged killing 2 people, among them his sister, makes the case incredibly bizarre. She was made to visit the murder scene by force, and after seeing the bodies she married him and had 3 more children for the ensuing 25 years. And it was pretty evident that she was just another one of his victims. This guy must have terrified the living hell out of her. He is obviously highly domineering and manipulative. She was on his side too. She worked a full-time job, he was not employed at all. She provided for the whole family while he was a stay-at-home father. But the idea that someone knowing the truth for 25 years is so difficult to accept, and the family received no closure for those 25 years. They were unaware of what had become of their loved ones. She killed his sister, married a man she knew was a killer, and had 3 children with him. She knew this the entire 25 years she spent with him. It was difficult to say anything the longer it went on, she continued. She was afraid for her children and for herself. Furthermore, it was abundantly evident that he was a very cunning and powerful manipulator. Every day at work, he would give her a call to see how she was doing and to find out what was going on. He refused to allow her to make her own friends. She claimed that because her father had also been violent toward her, it was easy for Ryan to dominate and manipulate her. He even went so far as to yell at her following her second police interview, in which she denied having an alibi and informed them that it was a lie. "I can't believe you did this," he says. "It's unbelievable that you told them this. You disregarded me completely. You truly are a betrayer." Subsequently, he turned off and said, "You know what? You weren't at fault. You were obviously bullied by them. They forced you to do this by threatening you. I should sue them, They should be sued for mistreating you and confusing my wife mentally." At that point, he continued to walk away. That whole slew of insane voicemails for Detective Barclay. And then he is constantly texting and contacting her during this interview when she is telling the complete truth about everything that transpired. I think he phoned her more than 100 times during the interview. And the police thought, this is crazy, after what she just told us, we really don't want to put Pam back in that position. So, we must take him into custody right away. Right immediately, we must take him into custody. Additionally, they did not want to allow him the chance to go dispose of any evidence, run away, or do anything similar. They proceeded and took him into custody. He denied everything when they brought him in and questioned him. Naturally, he did not enjoy that he continued to use his alibi and claimed to be uninvolved in the situation. He only acknowledged one incident of penetration with Gail, which he claimed was voluntary but which clearly no one believed to be the case, that he had molested his sister. There isn't an alternative. Nobody held a different belief. He essentially asked Pam to retract her account in 29 letters that he sent her while in detention following his arrest. He made an effort to persuade her that the investigators had intimidated, harassed, and forced her into signing the statement. They had mistreated her. He said she was lying. He intimidated her for defying him. At the start of his trial in March 2014, he was 51 years old. By now, the prosecution put out a case that claimed Brian killed both his sister and her husband because he was jealous of Gail and Rick's success in their middle-class lifestyle while he was having financial difficulties. and because he was afraid Gail would tell her husband about the incestuous abuse she had endured. In this trial, they will call 60 witnesses to testify against him, and of course his wife Pam is the main witness. After she testified to everything she had said during the interview, Ryan jumped up and began screaming at her, calling her a cold-blooded, nasty person and stating he couldn't believe she was making up such a false impression of him. During his own trial, he had to be physically removed from the courtroom. Daryl Kane, a fellow prisoner, claimed that throughout his incarceration before trial, he confessed to him that he was the murderer and was even boasting about it. He also mentioned his sister Cheryl, who has spent the previous 25 years advocating for the resolution of Rick's and her sister's case. "I would have murdered her long ago if I had known how much trouble she would make me," he replied. And he kind of mimed choking someone with his hands after that. Ryan gave his own testimony as well, and he was incredibly rambling and strange overall. He would often veer off on these wild tangents, requiring the judge to encourage him to keep on course. However, he insisted that he had never molested Gail and that their few sex experiences had been pure and exploratory, occurring when they were very young. However, he claimed that he had never abused Gail and that there had only been a few instances of what might be considered a sexual interaction. They were merely naive, exploratory when that occurred, which was very, very young. And he only ever acknowledged more when compelled to. He talked about 3 potentially sexually suggestive incidents that he and Gail had. The first was when he was 12 and Gail was 10. You can sort of see from these 3 examples that the ages don't really add up to anything in real life. However, he claimed that while they were in the shower naked and comparing body parts, Gail was 10 and he was 12. Then, when they were 11 and 13, he says he discovered a marijuana pipe in the car of his dad's friend. After getting high off of some pot, he and Gail made some slight advances toward one another. Then he added that the third encounter happened when I was 13 and he was 14, which is kind of weird because his and her ages are moving closer and closer together and make no sense at all. He is also 2.5 years older than her. Therefore, it is hardly conceivable that there was ever a moment when he was 14 and she was 13. However, he essentially claims that Gail was the aggressor in this most recent episode and that they were high once more. She stepped in front of him, but nothing happened since her father was approaching. Additionally, he asserted that he wouldn't have given a damn if Gail had notified Rick or anybody else about these occurrences. Therefore, it doesn't really make sense why he killed her and didn't want anyone to find out. In keeping with his initial alibi, he claimed that Pam had been pushed into lying and providing the alibi by threats and abuse, and that she had agreed to do so because she desired a divorce. He began to cry throughout the cross-examination and said things like, "I don't understand why my wife Pam and my sister Cheryl are testifying against me." The detectives must have forced them. Furthermore, he claimed that he is entitled to sue the county for this. Additionally, the prosecution contended throughout the trial that Ryan's missing shot caused the passenger window to smash rather than Rick. Additionally, a defense expert attempted to argue during his testimony that, in reality, a crowbar had broken it from the outside. Additionally, the defense stated in testimony that 2 of the 6 fingerprints did not match anyone in the databases, and 4 of the fingerprints belonged to the victims. Furthermore, the defense contended that Ryan's fingerprints did not match either of these 2. In addition, the defense attempted to raise a few more hypotheses. Moreover, one of these theories concerned Gail's contributions. Perhaps there was a work-related issue that required attention from someone. In essence, they attempted to claim that she was investigating financial anomalies at her business. Don't just call it seems like the document came from the business that was present at the crime scene. However, it was taken out of the murder scene before an investigation could be conducted. According to a Donnelly court representative, he visited the crime location and found no record there. He made no request for any documentation, acting as though they were non-existent. In essence, the prosecution even contended that the hypothesis of financial irregularities was the work of little green guys from Mars. The prosecution claimed that the defense was merely using sensationalized material to try to confuse the jury and that the motorcycle gang idea had already been refuted. The defense also attempted to resurrect this theory. Ultimately, Ryan Weingarten was found guilty of both and Rex matters on March 28, 2014. The date of his sentencing was in April. He also complained for an hour about how unfair his conviction was during the sentencing hearing. He started to cry. "I am a decent man," he said. "Why is this happening?" During the sentence hearing, Rick's brother also appeared. He revealed that Father North opened the funeral by saying, "I've never had a funeral started before, and I'll never again." "This is not the job of the law," he replied, to quote, "The devil is responsible for this." To that end, Ryan will be judged divinely, he continued. Ryan's rage and envy have destroyed the holidays and the beautiful moments we used to spend alone with family. Ryan was ultimately given 2 life sentences without the chance of release by the judge. Ryan also kept interrupting him when he was reading his sentence, telling the judge that the investigators had, quote, "mentally raped my wife and forced her to choose between lying to me or going to jail." In the end, the judge had to tell him to be silent and ask if he needed to be bound and gagged. If so, the deputies would go ahead and apply duct tape. However, you'll pay attention. Ryan filed 3 appeals against his conviction, one of which was to the Supreme Court. Nevertheless, each time, he was turned down. He was therefore kept behind bars following his conviction. "When done, we finally got him. He created the situation and now he has to pay for it," stated his sister Cheryl. Brother of Rick said, "Be quiet. We are ecstatic that my brother is receiving the justice he deserves." This provides us with some closure, at least in terms of how and why it occurred. Dorothea, Ryan's mother, was the only one who took issue with the conviction. She didn't think her son was at fault. She even said, "I don't care, you're wrong to an officer."